The stagecoach door opened, and she stepped down with tangled hair and a dress buttoned wrong. Everyone at the depot knew what it meant. The other brides whispered, the men smirked. But when the scarred rancher waiting for her simply picked up her bag and said, "You hungry?" the whole town held its breath. The stagecoach rolled into Thornfield Crossing 3 hours behind schedule, its wheels groaning under the weight of dust and distance. Silas Rourke waited at the depot with his hat pulled low, watching other men greet their mail-order brides with stiff handshakes and hopeful smiles. He'd paid honest money for a wife, exchanged letters for 6 months with a woman named Delilah Crane. She'd promised she could work hard and needed a place to begin again. That was all Silas had required. When the final passenger stepped down, Silas knew instantly she was the one meant for him. Not just because she resembled the daguerreotype she'd sent, though she did, but because every gaze in that depot snapped toward her with judgment sharp as shattered glass. Her auburn hair had slipped free from its pins, falling in tangled waves over her shoulders. Her gray traveling dress was creased from wear, the buttons misaligned as though she'd fastened them in a rush. A smudge, lipstick maybe, marked her jaw. She clutched a single battered carpetbag frozen on the stagecoach step, taking in the circle of strangers staring at her like she'd arrived already guilty of something. The stagecoach driver climbed down, grinning like a cat with cream. The other mail-order brides, already claimed by their prospective husbands, clustered together and whispered behind gloved hands. Their meaning was clear. This woman had been with someone during the journey. Recently. Delilah's eyes found Silas across the dusty street. Her chin lifted in defiance, but he saw the tremor in her hands. She expected him to reject her right there, to demand the marriage broker refund his money, to leave her stranded in a town that would never let her forget this moment. Silas picked up his hat and walked forward. The crowd parted. He stopped in front of Delilah and looked at her properly. Blue eyes met his, filled with exhaustion and barely contained desperation. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25. Pretty enough, though that hadn't mattered to him in the letters. He reached for her carpetbag. She flinched, but let him take it. "You hungry?" Silas asked. Delilah blinked. Of all the things she'd braced herself to hear, that wasn't among them. Yes. Good. There's a cafe 2 streets over. We'll eat, then head to the ranch." He turned and started walking toward his wagon. Behind him, he heard her quick footsteps as she hurried to follow. The crowd murmured, confused by his reaction. Silas didn't care what they thought. He'd learned long ago that judgment from strangers meant nothing. At the wagon, Silas lifted her carpetbag into the bed and offered his hand. Delilah hesitated, staring at his outstretched palm as if touching it might cost her something. Then slowly, cautiously, she placed her fingers in his. His grip was steady, warm despite the calluses etched deep from years of ranch work. She noticed the scars running up his right arm, pale and old, the kind a man earns over a lifetime of hard living. They ate in silence at the cafe. Silas ordered for both of them, and Delilah fell on the food with quiet desperation, eating like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. She probably hadn't. The 2-week stagecoach haul from St. Louis offered little more than stale biscuits and whatever the swing stations called supper. When she finished, he paid without comment and walked her back to the wagon. The ride to his ranch would take an hour. Delilah sat stiff beside him, hands folded tight in her lap, clearly bracing for the questions, the accusations. The anger she expected was coming. But Silas kept his eyes on the road, guiding the team with calm, unbothered movements. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't cold. It was careful. 2 battered souls sitting side by side trying to figure out how to build something out of the ruins they'd each carried to that depot. The ranch sat in a broad valley wrapped in rolling grassland that seemed to stretch into forever. Out here, neighbors weren't measured in yards. They were measured in miles. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop before a modest wood frame house with a covered porch. Not grand, not impressive, just solid. A place built by steady hands and meant to endure. He carried her carpet bag inside and led her to a small room just off the main living area. A narrow bed, a clean washstand, a simple trunk for clothing. Plain, yes, but tidy, cared for, lived in. "You'll sleep here," Silas said. "I'm next door, if you need anything." Delilah stood in the doorway, caught off guard. She had expected something else, expected to be claimed, expected to be ushered straight into his bed because that was how mail-order marriages worked, wasn't it? No courtship, no breathing room, no choice. But Silas was already turning away, giving her a kind of gentleness she hadn't dared hope existed. She unpacked her few belongings with shaking hands, then ventured into the main room. Silas was at the stove heating coffee. He poured 2 cups without asking and set one on the table for her. "I can cook," Delilah said quietly, "and mend. I'm good with my hands." "I know, you said so in your letters. What do you expect from me?" Silas turned to face her. His left eye had a scar running through the eyebrow she noticed now. His face was weathered, hard to read. "Help with the homestead. Cooking. Preserving food for winter. Mending when things tear. Ranch work if you're willing to learn. That's all." "That's all?" Her voice cracked. "You're not going to ask about the stagecoach?" "Not my business what happened before you got here. Everyone saw—" "I don't care what everyone saw." His tone was firm but not unkind. "You're here now. That's what matters." Delilah's composure shattered. She sank into the chair and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. The tears came hard and ugly, all the fear and shame she'd held back at the depot pouring out. Silas stood awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with her crying, but he didn't leave. After a moment, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "I didn't want it," she said through her tears. "The driver's friend he cornered me at a relay station said if I refused, he'd tell you lies, that I'd tried to rob him, that I was diseased. He said you'd send me back, and I'd already spent everything to come here. I had nothing left. No money, no family, nowhere to go." Her words tumbled out in a rush, desperate to make him understand. "I thought if I just endured it, I could still have a chance at a life here. I thought survival was worth the price. But when I saw your face at the depot, I realized you'd know. Everyone would know. And I'd lost everything anyway." Silas listened without interrupting. When she finally fell silent, he spoke quietly. "What's done is done. Can't change it. But you're not going back. This is your home now if you want it." "Why?" Delilah looked up at him with swollen eyes. "Why would you still want me?" "Because I understand what it means to survive something you can't talk about," Silas said. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, a tremor he tried to hide. "We all do what we have to. No shame in that." For the first time since Boston, Delilah felt something close to hope. This scarred, quiet man wasn't offering her judgment. He was offering her a chance to breathe. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Silas rose before dawn to tend the horses and cattle. Delilah managed the house, learning the layout of his simple life. They ate meals together in comfortable silence. She noticed things about him. How he positioned himself to see her face when she spoke, how he startled at sudden sounds, how some nights she heard him pacing in his room, unable to sleep. They were both running from something. The difference was here, they could run together. Delilah discovered the truth about Silas completely by accident. She was hanging laundry on the line when she spotted 3 riders coming from the eastern pasture. She called out to warn him once, then louder. But Silas didn't turn. He kept working on the fence post, utterly unaware. The riders were nearly at his shoulder before he finally sensed them, catching sight of their shadows stretching over the ground. His entire body went rigid. Instinctively, his hand shifted toward his hip, toward where a gun should have been, but wasn't. And in that instant, Delilah understood. He hadn't heard her. He hadn't heard the horses. He hadn't heard anything. The riders turned out to be neighbors searching for cattle that had strayed onto Silas's property. Their conversation was friendly enough, but Delilah noticed how Silas angled himself just so, making sure he could see each man's face, how his eyes tracked their mouths more than their words. After they rode off, she stayed silent. She didn't ask. She didn't press. But that evening, when she spoke to him indoors, she made certain to face him directly. Silas noticed. His jaw tightened. Not with anger, she realized, but with something closer to vulnerability. Then he gave a single quiet nod. A thank you without words. 2 days later, while mending his shirts, Delilah found the full extent of his scars. The fabric was torn at the shoulder, and when she examined it, she saw the blood stains that never quite washed out. She'd have to patch it. But it was what she saw when she held the shirt up to the light that made her hands still. Burn marks on the collar. Bullet holes through the back, crudely repaired. Dark stains that spoke of wounds that should have killed him. She thought of the scars on his arms, the one through his eyebrow, the way his hands shook sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. This man had been through a war that hadn't ended just because the fighting stopped. Delilah folded the shirt carefully, treating it like it mattered, because it did. The next morning, Silas began teaching her ranch work, not because he needed help, she realized, but because he wanted her to be capable, independent. Horses spook easy, he said, showing her how to approach his mares. Just move slow. Let them see you coming. Delilah reached out too quickly. The mare shied away. Try again, Silas said patiently. On her third attempt, the horse let her touch its neck. Silas's nod of approval felt like winning something valuable. Later that week, she failed to secure a fence gate properly. 2 horses got loose and led them on an hour-long chase across the property. When they finally caught them, Delilah braced herself for the anger she knew was coming. Her late husband would have shouted. His family would have called her useless. Silas just wiped the sweat from his face and said, I once let out an entire herd because I didn't check the latch. Took 3 days to round them up. You're not angry? Why would I be? You'll remember next time. That night, sitting by the fire, Delilah told him the truth she'd hidden. I wasn't running from scandal in Boston. I was running from my husband's family. Silas looked up from the harness he was mending. He died in a factory accident 2 years ago, she continued. His family blamed me. Said I distracted him, made him careless. They took everything. The house, the savings, even my wedding ring. They spread rumors that I'd been unfaithful, that I'd driven him to distraction. Boston society believed them because they had money and I had nothing. Her voice steadied as she spoke. The mail-order bride agency was my last option. If I'd stayed, I would have starved or ended up in a brothel. I had no choice but to leave everything I knew. Silas set down the harness. Your husband's family sounds like cowards. Easier to blame you than accept accidents happen. You believe me. Why wouldn't I? He met her eyes. People with power always need someone to crush. Makes them feel bigger. It was the most he'd said at once since she'd arrived. Delilah realized he understood because he'd been crushed too. 3 weeks after Delilah arrived, a rider came up the valley road in late afternoon. Delilah was in the garden when she saw him, and her blood turned to ice. Cole Hastings, the stagecoach driver's friend. She dropped the basket of vegetables and ran for the house. Silas was in the barn, too far to hear her shout. By the time she reached the porch, Hastings had already dismounted. Well, well, he said, grinning. Didn't think I'd forget about you, did you? Delilah's hand found the porch rail to steady herself. What do you want? What's owed to me? Hastings climbed the steps, backing her toward the door. You stole from me on that stagecoach. $50. I want it back or I want your husband to pay up. I didn't steal anything from you. That's not how I remember it. His smile was ugly. You distracted me real nice, then went through my coat pockets. I got witnesses who saw you acting friendly. It was a lie, all of it. But Delilah knew how these things worked. His word against hers, and she'd already arrived with her reputation in tatters. Silas won't believe you. Won't he? You sure about that? Hastings leaned closer. Maybe I'll tell him some other things too, about how willing you were, how you begged for it. The barn door opened. Silas walked out carrying a saddle. He saw Hastings on his porch, saw Delilah's face, and his whole demeanor changed. The easy movement vanished. He set down the saddle and crossed the yard with purpose. "Get off my property." Hastings turned, still smiling. "You must be Rourke. We need to talk about your wife here. She owes me money." "Delilah doesn't owe you anything." "See, that's where you're wrong." Hastings stepped back to face Silas properly. "On the stagecoach from St. Louis, she got real friendly with me. Afterwards, $50 went missing from my coat. Now, I'm not saying she's a thief necessarily, but it's quite a coincidence." Silas looked at Delilah. "That true?" "He's lying," she said, her voice shaking. "He took what he wanted from me, and now he wants money too." "She's lying," Hastings countered smoothly. "Ask anyone on that coach. They saw her flirting, saw her follow me out at the relay station. This is what you get with mail-order brides, friend. Never know what you're really buying." Silas turned back to Hastings. His expression was unreadable. "Tell me exactly what happened, every detail." Hastings spun his story with practiced ease, made Delilah the seductress, himself the victim, described her dress, her words, how she'd supposedly initiated, everything. He was convincing. Delilah felt her new life crumbling around her. When Hastings finished, Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're lying." "Now wait just a minute, me. I can tell when a man's lying." Silas's voice was cold as winter. "You got too many details right. Women who steal don't remember what they're wearing, and men who get robbed don't smile when they talk about it." He walked to the porch and picked up his rifle, which always leaned by the door. "You have until I count to 10 to get off my land." Hastings's confidence cracked. "You threatening me? 1, 2, 3. You can't just eat." 4. 5. Hastings backed toward his horse. "This isn't over, Rourke. I got friends. I got the law on my side." 6, 7. Silas raised the rifle to his shoulder. Hastings mounted fast and spurred his horse hard. "You'll regret this." 8, 9. Silas tracked him with the rifle until he disappeared over the rise. He lowered the gun and turned to Delilah. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "You're my wife now," Silas said. "Paperwork or not, that means you're protected here. He comes back, I'll kill him." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. After Hastings left, something shifted between them. Silas had claimed Delilah as his wife in front of a threat, and those words couldn't be taken back. That night, she couldn't sleep. She found him on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. "Maybe. Men like that don't handle rejection well." Delilah sat beside him. "Why did you believe me?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "During the war, I was captured by Confederate irregulars, not regular army, the kind of men who enjoyed what they did." He didn't look at her as he spoke. "They kept us in a root cellar for 3 months. 5 of us at first. By the time Union forces found us, I was the only one left. The things they did," his hands tightened on the rifle. "I learned what real cruelty looks like, how men who enjoy power talk about it afterwards." "The scars," Delilah said softly. "Some of them. The burns came from heated iron rods. The bullet wounds from when they got bored and used us for target practice, made sure to miss anything vital, wanted us alive as long as possible." His voice was flat, emotionless. "The hearing I lost when one of them fired a pistol next to my ear for fun happened so many times I can barely hear from this side at all." Delilah felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I survived. That's more than most." He finally looked at her. "Point is, I know what it sounds like when someone takes pleasure in hurting others. Hastings had that sound. You didn't. That's how I knew." She understood then. His acceptance of her wasn't naive kindness. It was recognition. 2 people who'd been powerless, who'd done what they had to in order to survive. "My husband wasn't a bad man," Delilah said, "just weak. His mother controlled everything. After he died, she convinced the whole family I was to blame, said I'd been demanding, ungrateful, that I'd insisted he work extra shifts to pay for luxuries. Were you demanding? I asked for a winter coat because mine had holes. She called that vanity. Delilah's voice hardened. After the funeral, they went through our rooms and took everything of value. His mother wore my wedding ring on a chain around her neck, said she was keeping it safe for her son's memory. When I objected, they called me hysterical and threw me out. How did you survive? I didn't, not really. I worked in a laundry for 18 months, barely eating. The other women were kind, but they had their own troubles. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, I spent my last savings on the application fee. She laughed bitterly. Thought I was choosing freedom. Didn't realize I was just trading one form of powerlessness for another. You're not powerless here, Silas said. Aren't I? Hastings could come back with the law. He could say anything and be believed because I'm just a woman who arrived already ruined. Then we make sure you're not defenseless. Silas stood and held out his hand. Come on. He led her to the barn and lit a lantern. From a locked trunk, he pulled out a small revolver. Can you shoot? No. You're going to learn. He placed the gun in her hand. Tomorrow I'll teach you, and how to ride fast if you need to. How to defend this place if I'm not here. Delilah looked at the cold metal in her palm. It was heavier than she'd expected. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she whispered. Then stop being prey, Silas said. Be the wolf instead. 2 weeks later, Silas took Delilah into Thornfield Crossing for supplies. She'd avoided town since her arrival, but they needed flour and salt before winter set in. The general store fell quiet when they entered. Women gathered near the fabric display whispered behind their hands. A man at the counter smirked at his companion. Everyone had heard the stories by now. Delilah kept her chin up and focused on the shopping list. Silas stayed close, his presence a steady wall between her and the judgment. Mrs. Rourke. A woman's voice cut through the whispers. An older woman with steel-gray hair approached. She wore a fine dress that spoke of money, and her eyes were sharp as nails. I'm Constance Abernathy. I wanted to welcome you properly to our community. The whispers stopped. Everyone watched. Thank you, Delilah said carefully. Mrs. Abernathy smiled. I arrived here in 1851 as a mail-order bride myself. Stepped off the wagon 6 months pregnant with another man's child. My husband-to-be married me anyway. We had 42 good years before he passed. The watching crowd shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Abernathy was the wealthiest widow in town, and her opinion carried weight. Would you join me for tea tomorrow? I'd like to hear how you're settling in. It wasn't really a question. Delilah nodded, understanding she'd just been offered protection she desperately needed. At the counter, the storekeeper tallied their purchases with barely concealed disdain. That'll be $18. Silas paid without comment and gathered their supplies. Outside, they nearly collided with Reverend Finch on the boardwalk. The preacher's eyes traveled from Silas to Delilah with open disapproval. Mr. Rourke, I haven't seen you and your companion at Sunday services. We've been busy, Silas said flatly. I'm sure you have, though I wonder if your arrangement is pleasing to God. A woman living in your home without proper marriage vows, especially one who arrived in such questionable circumstances. My relationship with God is my business, Silas said. So is my marriage. Marriage requires a ceremony blessed by the church. It requires 2 people choosing each other. The rest is paperwork. Silas stepped around the reverend. Come on, Delilah. As they loaded the wagon, a younger woman approached hesitantly. She'd been on the stagecoach with Delilah, one of the other mail-order brides. Mrs. Rourke, she said softly. I'm Elizabeth. We traveled together, remember? Delilah nodded. I wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up when... Elizabeth glanced around to make sure no one was listening. When that man bothered you at the relay station, I saw him follow you. I knew it wasn't right, but I was too scared to say anything. It's not your fault, Delilah said. My husband parades me around like a prize mare, Elizabeth continued bitterly. Shows me off to his friends, corrects how I speak, tells me I should be grateful he chose me. You're lucky, you know. Mr. Rourke treats you like a person. Delilah looked at Silas, who was checking the wagon harness and pretending not to listen. I know. On the ride home, Silas was quiet. Finally, he said, The Reverend's right about one thing. We should make it legal. Not for them, for you. So, if anything happens to me, the ranch is yours. Nobody can take it away. You do that? Already decided. He glanced at her. Unless you don't want to be tied to a broken-down war veteran permanently. Delilah touched his scarred hand on the reins. I think we're both broken in ways that fit together. For the first time since she'd known him, Silas smiled. It was small and rusty from disuse, but real. The marshal arrived on a gray morning 2 weeks later. Behind him rode Cole Hastings, wearing a satisfied smile that made Delilah's stomach drop. Silas met them in the yard, rifle in easy reach. Marshal Dawson, he said, recognizing the lawman from town. What's this about? The marshal dismounted, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Rourke, got a situation here that needs addressing. Hastings climbed down from his horse, pulling papers from his saddlebag. Mrs. Rourke is wanted for theft in Boston, Massachusetts. Got documentation right here, warrant signed by a judge. Delilah felt the ground tilt beneath her. That's not true. Says here you stole $500 in jewelry from your late husband's family before fleeing the state. Hastings handed the papers to the marshal. They've been looking for you for 2 years. Marshal Dawson examined the documents. They looked official. Stamps, signatures, legal seals. These appear legitimate, Mrs. Rourke. I'm obligated to investigate. It's a lie, Delilah said, her voice rising. His family took everything from me. They're the thieves, not me. That's what they all say, Hastings said smoothly. You can understand why they'd want their property back, and why they'd be upset about a thief masquerading as a respectable mail-order bride. Silas stepped between them. How convenient you show up with these papers, Hastings, right after I ran you off my property. I was doing my civic duty, Hastings said. Asked around about your wife, and turns out there was already a warrant out. Just took some telegrams to Boston to confirm it. He's lying, Delilah said desperately. My husband's family blamed me for his death. They wanted revenge. They'd say anything. Marshal Dawson sighed. I believe you might be telling the truth, Mrs. Rourke, but these documents are legal. I have to follow up. Could mean extradition back to Massachusetts for trial. How long? Silas asked. I can give you a week to gather evidence in your defense. After that, I'll have no choice but to take her into custody. A week, Hastings said, grinning. That's generous, Marshal. Though I suppose it gives Mr. Rourke time to cut his losses. Probably wants his money back from the bride agency anyway. Silas's hand moved to his gun. The marshal caught it. Don't, Dawson said quietly. That won't help her. After they left, Delilah collapsed on the porch steps. It's over. They found a way to destroy me after all. It's not over. Silas was already moving, purpose in every step. Get me paper and pen. I'm sending telegrams to every factory worker who knew your husband, every neighbor who saw how his family treated you, every person who can testify this is revenge, not justice. That will take money we don't have. Then I'll mortgage the ranch. He pulled her to her feet. You're my wife. I don't abandon what's mine. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Silas cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Because you're worth fighting for. And because if I let them take you, I'm no different than the men who took everything from me and called it duty. Delilah leaned into his touch, feeling something crack open in her chest. It might have been hope. It might have been love. She wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. We have 1 week, Silas said. Let's make them count. He rode to town that afternoon and didn't return until nightfall. When he did, he had receipts for a dozen telegrams sent east in the name of a lawyer in Cheyenne who worked on credit. The fight had begun. The week crawled by like a death sentence. Each day, Silas rode to town to check for telegram responses. Each day, Delilah waited at the ranch, learning to shoot, learning to be ready for whatever came next. On the 5th day, the telegrams started arriving. A factory foreman who'd witnessed the accident wrote that Delilah's husband had been distracted by faulty machinery, not his wife. 3 neighbors testified to the family's cruelty after the funeral. A lawyer in Boston sent depositions proving the family had been facing bankruptcy and needed someone to blame for their financial troubles. The theft charge was invented from desperation, not fact. On the 7th day, Marshal Dawson returned with Hastings, but this time, the marshal's expression was different. "Mr. Hastings," he said formally, "you're under arrest for filing false reports and conspiracy to commit fraud." Hastings's face went purple. "What? Those documents were legitimate." "They were forgeries." The marshal held up a telegram. Boston police confirmed no warrant was ever issued for Delilah Crane. The judge whose signature appears on these papers died 3 years ago. You paid someone to create fake documents. "This is ridiculous. I was doing the family a favor." "The family you're talking about hired you to bring Mrs. Rourke back or ruin her completely. They admitted it when Boston authorities questioned them about the false warrant." The marshal pulled out handcuffs. "Seems they wanted revenge for their son's death and couldn't accept a woman escaping their control." Hastings lunged for his horse. Silas was faster, blocking his path with the rifle. "You're not running from this," Silas said coldly. As the marshal took Hastings away in irons, half of Thornfield Crossing had gathered to watch. The story spread through town like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew the truth. But knowing the truth didn't erase the damage. The whispers continued. Some people sympathized. Others still believed there was no smoke without fire. Sunday morning, Silas did something unexpected. He dressed in his cleanest shirt and told Delilah they were going to church. "I don't want to face them," she said. "Neither do I, but we're going anyway." They sat in the back pew. Reverend Finch's sermon was about forgiveness, though his eyes kept drifting to them with obvious disapproval. When the service ended, Silas stood before the congregation could disperse. "I want to say something," he announced. The church went silent. Silas wasn't a man who spoke publicly. "Most of you know what happened this week. Some of you still have doubts about my wife's character." His voice carried through the small church. "I want to tell you about my character instead. I spent 3 months in a Confederate prison. I did things there to survive that I'm not proud of. Begged when I should have stayed silent. Gave up information that got other men killed. I came home broken in ways you can't see." The congregation shifted uncomfortably. Delilah reached for his hand. "If we only accepted perfect people in this town, we'd all be alone," Silas continued. "Delilah survived something she couldn't control, just like I did. That doesn't make her less. It makes her stronger. And if any of you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me directly." He sat down. The silence stretched until Mrs. Abernathy began clapping. Slowly, others joined. Not everyone, but enough. After the service, 3 families invited them for supper. With the legal troubles behind them, life at the ranch settled into something that felt almost normal. But something had changed between them. The forced closeness during the crisis had transformed into something deeper, something neither of them quite knew how to name. One evening, Delilah found Silas at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper with frustration etched across his face. His hand gripped the pen so hard his knuckles were white. "What are you trying to write?" she asked. "Thank you letters. To the people who sent testimonies." He set down the pen roughly. "I can read well enough, but writing more than a few words makes me look like a fool." "You're not a fool. I had 6 years of schooling before the war. Not enough to put proper sentences together." He looked embarrassed. "Always meant to improve, but ranch work doesn't leave much time for learning." Delilah sat beside him. "Tell me what you want to say. I'll help you write it." They worked together for 2 hours, crafting letters to factory workers and neighbors they'd never met. People who'd told the truth when they could have stayed silent. Silas's gratitude was simple and genuine, and Delilah found herself falling for him all over again with each careful word. Later they sat on the porch watching stars emerge. The air had turned cold with approaching autumn. "I was engaged before the war," Silas said suddenly. "Her name was Catherine. We planned to marry when I got back. Delilah stayed quiet, sensing he needed to tell this. When I came home, I was different. Couldn't hear right, couldn't sleep through the night, jumped at loud noises. She tried for a while, but I saw the way she looked at me, like I was broken glass she was afraid to touch. His voice was matter of fact, but Delilah heard the old pain underneath. She married the banker's son 6 months later, sent me a letter apologizing for not being strong enough to love a damaged man. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was honest about what she could handle. I built this ranch to prove I could still be whole, that I could create something lasting even with shaking hands and half my hearing gone. He turned to face her. Then you arrived, already broken in the ways that mattered, and you didn't need me to be perfect either. Delilah's throat tightened. I need you to be exactly who you are. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It was scratched and worn, clearly old. This was my mother's, only thing that survived the fire, that killed her. He held it up between them. I'm asking you properly this time, Delilah, not from obligation or contract, but because I choose you. Will you marry me? Delilah took the ring with trembling fingers. It was warm from being carried close to his heart. Yes, she whispered. Silas pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it was tentative. Two wounded people learning to trust touch again, learning that intimacy didn't have to come from violence or duty, that it could be chosen freely, given without conditions. That night, they planned their wedding. Not the elaborate ceremony society expected, but something honest. Mrs. Abernathy would officiate, since she held authority as a justice of the peace. The marshal would witness. No church, no reverend passing judgment, just two people making promises they intended to keep. I'm glad I arrived the way I did, Delilah said as they prepared for bed, because it meant you accepted me at my worst. There's no pretense between us. Silas touched her face gently. No pretense, just truth. That's worth more than 1,000 perfect beginnings. The wedding took place on a bright October morning in the ranch house parlor. Delilah wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Mrs. Abernathy had gifted her. Silas wore his best shirt, the one without bullet holes. Mrs. Abernathy officiated with surprising warmth. Marriage isn't about arriving perfect, she said. It's about choosing each other every day, especially on the days when choosing is hard. Marshal Dawson stood as witness, and to Delilah's surprise, he'd brought his wife along. Figured you could use the support, he said quietly. The vows they exchanged were personal, not the traditional words about obedience and duty, but promises of partnership. Silas vowed to see Delilah as his equal, to protect without controlling. Delilah vowed to stand beside him, to build something lasting from their shared scars. When Mrs. Abernathy pronounced them married, Silas kissed his wife with a gentleness that made her heart ache. The celebration came as a surprise. As the small ceremony ended, wagons began arriving. Families from town, neighbors from distant ranches, even Elizabeth and her husband appeared with food and gifts. Word had spread, and people came to show support. It wasn't everyone. Reverend Finch was notably absent. Some of the wealthier families stayed away. But enough people came that the ranch yard filled with music and laughter. Mrs. Abernathy pulled Delilah aside as the sun set. You did well, child. Built something real from nothing. I'm still afraid sometimes, Delilah admitted, that it will all fall apart. Fear is wisdom wearing different clothes. Just don't let it stop you from living. The older woman squeezed her hand. You've got a good man there. One who sees you clearly and loves what he sees. That's rarer than gold. As night fell and guests departed, Silas and Delilah stood together watching the last wagon disappear down the valley road. Ready? Silas asked, offering his hand. Delilah took it, and they walked into the house as husband and wife. The intimacy that followed was gentle, both of them careful with each other's wounds, healing old pain through new connection, learning that touch could be tender, that vulnerability didn't mean weakness. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Delilah said, "I'm glad I arrived the way I did. If I'd come here pristine and perfect, you might have expected me to stay that way. We'd have spent years pretending to be people we're not." "No pretense," Silas agreed, "just truth." Months passed. Winter came hard, but they weathered it together. Silas taught Delilah to track animals through snow. She taught him to read more complex books. They worked side by side, building their life one careful choice at a time. A letter arrived in spring from Boston. Delilah's former in-laws had been exposed for financial fraud, the real reason they'd needed her supposed inheritance. The scandal ruined them completely. Delilah read the letter twice, then fed it to the fire. "Doesn't matter anymore," she said. Silas wrapped his arms around her from behind. "No, it doesn't." They had built something stronger than revenge, more lasting than vindication. They had built a home from broken pieces, proved that the most honest love grows not from perfect beginnings, but from accepting each other's worst moments and choosing to stay anyway. In the end, that was all that mattered. If this story touched your heart, click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales of love, redemption, and second chances. Because everyone deserves a story where broken doesn't mean beyond repair, and arriving imperfect is just another way of arriving honest.